It was supposed to be my land, my lake, my peace, but somehow I ended up with cops at my campsite in the middle of the day, accused of trespassing on property I've owned for over a decade. That's right. They called the police on me for camping at my own lake, and what followed was the most outrageous confrontation I've ever faced. But let me rewind just a bit, because you have to understand how ordinary this all began. That's what made the whole thing feel so surreal. The morning was one of those rare, perfect days. Clear skies, a light breeze, the sun reflecting off the water in shimmering waves, and just the sound of birds overhead and insects humming through the wild grass. I'd packed up my old camping chair, a cooler with a couple of turkey sandwiches, and a six-pack of Shiner Bock, and headed down to the same exact spot Emily and I used to sit. It's been 5 years since I lost her, but the lake still felt like the one place where I could talk to her and almost hear her laugh riding on the wind. It was my weekend tradition, my way of honoring everything we'd built together. I'd sit under the cottonwoods, watch the herons drift lazily across the lake, and think about the plans we once made, building a dock, hosting barbecues, maybe even setting up a little cabin someday. It wasn't just land to me, it was memory, it was healing, it was home. I'd just settled in with my first beer, the label still cold in my hand, when I heard the crunch of gravel behind me. At first I thought maybe it was a neighbor stopping by, or maybe a delivery driver confused about the dirt roads around here. But when I looked over my shoulder, I saw 2 sheriff SUVs easing down the slope, tires kicking up clouds of dust that caught the sunlight like smoke. Behind them, a sleek black Lexus, gliding to a stop like it was allergic to dirt. My stomach sank. That car only meant one thing. HOA royalty had arrived. The doors of the lead cruiser opened, and out stepped Deputy Morales. We'd played football together back in high school, and though we hadn't stayed close, there'd always been a mutual respect. But the way he looked at me now, stiff, unreadable, that told me this wasn't a friendly check-in. From the Lexus, Patricia Hammond emerged like she was stepping onto a stage. Blonde bob, perfectly styled, designer sunglasses that probably cost more than my truck payment, and a clipboard tucked under her arm like it was a royal decree. She walked with purpose, her heels stabbing into the dry earth like it offended her. "That's him," she said, pointing straight at me with the kind of tone you'd use if you caught a raccoon rifling through your trash, not the owner of the land you were standing on. "That's the man trespassing on HOA. Controlled property." I blinked, stunned for a second. "Trespassing?" I repeated, laughing a little, thinking surely she was mistaken or joking or drunk on HOA power. But she was dead serious. "You're in violation of community camping regulations. Fires are not permitted near Crestview Heights watershed zone," she added, her voice sharp enough to cut wire. Morales glanced between us, visibly uncomfortable. "Dan," he said, using that measured tone cops use when they're about to say something stupid. "We got a complaint. Mrs. Hammond here says this lake technically falls within Crestview's jurisdiction. And, well, there's been reports of disturbances." I stood slowly, brushing dust off my jeans, still gripping my drink like it might anchor me to reality. "I've owned this land for 10 years, paid for it with my parents' inheritance and every dime Emily and I ever saved. This lake is mine, and I've got the papers to prove it." I reached into my jacket and pulled out the deed I always kept folded in my back pocket. It was worn at the edges, creased and yellowed from age, but legal, real, binding. Morales took it in his hands, scanning it with a furrowed brow. Patricia, meanwhile, swooped in like a hawk, snatching the document before he'd finished. She looked at it for all of 2 seconds before scoffing. "Anyone can print a document and slap a signature on it," she said, tossing it back at my chest. "Everyone around here knows that lake has always been part of Crestview Heights. You're squatting on HOA-maintained land." I was trying to stay calm, but the way she said it, the arrogance in her voice, like I was just some pest she had to get rid of, made my blood boil. "You're mistaken," I said, struggling to keep my voice level. "I've been camping here every other weekend for years. No one said a word. And now, suddenly, I'm a threat?" Patricia didn't even blink. "That was before the new enforcement guidelines, and I've got the full backing of the board. If you don't leave voluntarily, we'll be forced to take legal action." That's when Morales stepped in, clearly trying to avoid the whole thing blowing up. "Dan, look, I believe you. I do. But just for now, maybe just Pack it up. Let's sort this out the right way. I'll take a closer look at the boundary lines. It's not worth getting cited. Not worth getting cited. For being on my land. I looked down at the dirt beneath my boots. At the lake Emily loved. At the trees we used to walk past every evening, and then back at Morales. This is my home, I said quietly. I'm not going anywhere. Patricia laughed, low and smug. You can dig your heels in all you want. In the end, the law's on our side. You're the trespasser here, not me. Then she turned on her heel and marched back to her car, leaving dust in her wake and a storm brewing in my chest. I watched her drive off, that smug little wave she gave me still burning in my mind like a brand. The same hand that pointed at me like I was a criminal, waving goodbye like she'd already won. Morales lingered behind, scratching the back of his neck like he was trying to dig his way out of guilt. He mumbled something about how these boundary disputes can be messy, how it's all about technicalities and paperwork, and how the HOA's been pushing hard lately about new community safety measures. I didn't say anything. I didn't trust myself to speak just yet. My fists were clenched tight enough that I could feel my nails digging into my palms, but I kept it together, barely. Morales finally sighed and said he'd look into it, but I already knew that meant nothing. He was stuck between doing what's right and protecting his job, and I could see exactly which way the wind was blowing. As soon as he left, I sat back down by the lake, staring at the ripples where a breeze cut across the surface, but the peace was gone, replaced by a deep, gnawing anger that felt older than today, older than even Patricia. It was the same feeling I had when we first scraped enough money together to buy this land, terrified someone would find a way to take it. I unfolded the deed, smoothing out the creases for what must have been the 1,000th time, reading over every legal word like I was trying to find strength between the lines. My name, Emily's name, the signatures, the survey coordinates, the official county stamp. It was all there, ironclad. And yet, somehow, it wasn't enough to stop a woman with a clipboard and an attitude from marching in and calling the cops on me. I packed up my gear slowly, the act mechanical, my mind racing. Every time I folded a chair or zippered a tent flap, I imagined the look on Patricia's face if I refused, if I stayed, if I fought. But there was something worse than leaving in that moment, giving her an excuse to escalate it. If she was willing to drag the cops out here over a campfire, who knew what she'd pull next? My gut told me this wasn't just about rules. This was personal for her. There was something under the surface of all this HOA talk, some deeper motive I hadn't seen yet. As I loaded the last cooler into the bed of the truck, I made a quiet promise to myself and to Emily's memory. This wasn't over. Driving back up the dirt road, the sun glinting off my windshield like it was mocking me, I noticed something strange just past the bend where the trees thicken. The ground was disturbed, tire tracks crisscrossing near the edge of the lake that I hadn't noticed before, and not mine. These were fresh, deep grooves from a wider vehicle, maybe an ATV or one of those oversized HOA golf carts they love to parade around in like little tanks. I parked the truck and walked back down to the lakeside, my boots crunching the dry grass, more alert now than I'd been all day. That's when I saw it. Trash. Not mine. Someone had left behind a crumpled energy drink can, a fast food wrapper stuffed into the roots of a tree, and a single flip-flop half buried in the sand. My heart started pounding not with fear, but with clarity. Someone had been here, recently, during the day while I was away, and it sure as hell wasn't a hiker passing through. This was a picnic, a hangout, maybe even regular use. I started combing the shoreline and found more Cygnus-scorched wood from an old fire pit tucked behind the cattails, a fishing line snagged in a branch, and the distinct tracks of someone who'd walked in from the Crestview side. That's when it clicked. They weren't just trying to scare me off. They'd been using my lake, sneaking in, maybe for weeks, maybe for months. Patricia's sudden crusade to label my lake community property wasn't about protecting her precious HOA residents from mate, was about covering up the fact that she and her people had already been trespassing on my land. And now that someone else, me, the actual owner, had shown up, she needed a narrative to flip the script, to turn me into the intruder, to keep her little secret safe. I crouched by the footprints, measuring their size, seeing two distinct treads in the dry mud, a man and a woman maybe teens, but either way they weren't scared. They'd made themselves at home, and that changed everything. Patricia wasn't defending her community. She was trying to steal what she'd already been using in secret. She was trying to erase my name from my own property. As I stood there in the midday heat, sun beating down on my back and the reflection of the lake nearly blinding, I felt something inside me settle, not anger, not yet, but purpose. I was being framed in broad daylight, but now I had more than just a gut feeling. I had proof, and it was time to dig deeper, to watch closer, to prepare. Because Patricia might think she owned the neighborhood, but she didn't own me, and she sure as hell didn't own this lake. I spent the rest of that afternoon buried in paper, digging through boxes that hadn't seen daylight in years. Everything I had on the property purchase receipts, bank transfers, emails from the real estate office, zoning maps was scattered across the kitchen table. I'd saved it all, every scrap, partly because I'm the kind of guy who hates to throw out important documents, and partly because Emily had insisted we keep everything. One day, we might need to prove this land is really ours, she'd said, more than once, with that tone of hers that always carried a strange kind of foresight. And now, that day had come. My fingers trembled slightly as I flipped through faded manila folders, trying to find something that could explain why Patricia thought she had a claim to my lake. And that's when I saw it. An old photocopy of a town hall zoning map from over 15 years ago, back when the area was still mostly ranchland and not yet invaded by high-end developments with cookie-cutter mansions and lawn flamingos. The lines were faint, hand-drawn, some barely legible. My lot was there, clearly marked, as was the lake centered neatly within the boundary. But right next to it, almost overlapping the northeast corner of the water, someone had scribbled a single word in faded blue ink. Shared. No signature, no date, no initials. Just that one word. I stared at it for a long time, trying to figure out if it was real, if it was a mistake, or if it was some leftover relic from when the land was divided decades ago. My stomach tightened. That one word, ambiguous as it was, could be the seed Patricia was using to plant doubt, to muddy the waters. Legally, it meant nothing not without backing documents. But in the court of HOA politics and public opinion, it could be twisted, rewritten, weaponized. By now, the sun was starting to dip low in the sky, casting long shadows across the kitchen. But I didn't notice. My mind was racing, already putting the pieces together. If Patricia had seen this map or one like it, she could spin a tale about how the lake was part of some old community plan, how it was always meant to be public access. Never mind that the deed in my name said otherwise. Never mind that the property taxes were coming to my mailbox. She'd take that little scribble and wave it around like gospel. And just when I thought it couldn't get any more twisted, I checked my email. There it was, waiting like a punch in the gut. Subject line, cease and desist. Unauthorized use of HOA property. From the Crestview Heights legal team. I opened it with a kind of morbid curiosity, and what I read made my jaw clench so tight it hurt. The letter accused me of violating multiple HOA regulations, including illegal camping, fire hazards, unauthorized use of shared water resources, and behavior detrimental to community well-being. It demanded I immediately vacate and cease all activity at the lake or face legal and financial repercussions. My name, my address, the GPS coordinates of my lake, it was all there, like they were building a criminal case. The arrogance practically dripped from every sentence. But that wasn't the worst part. Attached to the email were photos, dozens of them. Photos of me at the lake from multiple angles, some taken from the tree line, others from higher elevation, possibly from a drone. Me sitting in my chair, me grilling lunch, me fishing, me skipping rocks. Some were time-stamped from months ago. Someone had been watching me, for weeks, maybe longer, documenting my every visit like I was the intruder, like I was a criminal sneaking onto someone else's land. The realization hit like ice water. This had been planned, prepped. Patricia had been laying the groundwork long before she showed up with the cops. And whoever had taken these photos wasn't doing it for a hobby. They were gathering ammo, building a case, manipulating the truth one image at a time. That night I barely slept. I sat at the edge of the bed, staring at those photos again and again, trying to remember each moment they'd been taken. It was like reliving the last 6 months of my life through a stranger's lens, except the stranger was hoping to ruin me. The next morning, The lake pulled me back like a magnet. I had to see it again with my own eyes. Maybe to convince myself it was still mine. Maybe to check if they'd been back. The sun was already high, and the smell of wild sage carried on the breeze as I made my way down the familiar path. Everything looked normal, until it didn't. There, near the shore liner right where I usually set my chair, something shimmered. A strange slick across the water's surface, subtle but undeniable. At first I thought maybe it was pollen or some natural algae bloom, but then the wind shifted, and the smell hit me. Sharp, chemical, artificial, not natural at all. I stepped closer and saw small fish floating belly up in the shallows, their bodies motionless, their silver scales catching the light like tiny mirrors of death. My heart sank. No way this was natural. Not here. Not now. I sprinted back up to the truck and grabbed my old laptop and the portable hard drive connected to my trail cams. I'd installed them years ago, mostly for wildlife watching and security, but I hadn't reviewed the footage in months. I scrolled through days of empty frame trees swaying, raccoons sniffing around until I hit gold. There she was, Patricia, in full daylight, mid-morning, walking along the far edge of the lake. She wasn't alone. A man followed her, pushing a dolly stacked with large plastic containers, dark, unlabeled, ominous. They stopped near the water, looked around casually like they were checking for witnesses, then lifted a container and began pouring its contents into the lake. The angle wasn't perfect, but it was clear enough. Clear enough to destroy her entire narrative. Clear enough to prove intent. I stared at the screen, rage building slowly, steadily. She hadn't just lied. She hadn't just manipulated documents or bent old maps to her will. She had poisoned my lake, my land, my memories. I backed up the footage to every drive I owned, sent copies to 3 different cloud accounts, and printed stills like they were evidence in a war crime, because that's exactly what it felt like. This wasn't just property theft. This was destruction, erasure. Patricia wasn't trying to claim what wasn't hers, was trying to burn down what was mine so that no one else could have it. And now, I finally had the proof to burn her back. I knew the footage was a game changer, but evidence means nothing if it sits quietly in a folder. I needed backup. Not just legal documents and pixelated video clips, I needed history, context. Something that painted the full picture of what Patricia had been doing and how far back it went. That's when I remembered Evelyn Harper. She'd lived in this county longer than anyone I knew. Back before Crestview, Heights was a gated labyrinth of manicured lawns and passive-aggressive newsletters, back when it was just ranchers and dirt roads and neighbors who waved at each other. Evelyn had seen it all, and she didn't miss much. I called her just after breakfast, expecting to get her voicemail, but she picked up on the second ring with that same clipped, no-nonsense voice I remembered from town meetings. "Dan Carver," she said. "Took you long enough." Before I could even explain, she was already inviting me over, telling me to bring the deed, the photos, and anything else Patricia might try to twist. Evelyn's place was like stepping into a museum of the town's past wall-to-wall history, faded photographs of cattle drives and summer parades, newspaper clippings framed like works of art. She handed me a cup of tea without asking what I wanted, and sat me down at her dining table already stacked with folders. "This isn't the first time someone tried to steal land using an HOA banner," she said, flipping through a stack of documents so fast I could barely follow. "But Patricia? She's got a special kind of arrogance. Reminds me of the Garrison Mess family over by the creek. HOA claimed the right to enforce mineral access and water restrictions. Before they knew it, their deed had been challenged in court, and half their property was rezoned right out from under them." She slid a weathered folder across the table, revealing court documents with familiar legal language, and one name in the defendant column that sent a jolt down my spine. Patricia Hammond. But she hadn't always gone by that. Back then, she was Patricia Ellison, same grin, same style, same pattern of manipulation. She moved here right after that case settled, changed her name, started fresh. But snakes don't change stripes, Dan. They just wait for new grass to hide in. Armed with that history, I started putting the pieces together. She wasn't just power-hungry, she was experienced, strategic. She knew how to make landowners look like criminals and how to disguise theft as community protection. But she'd made a mistake this time. She didn't count on someone fighting back. That's when Evelyn leaned closer and said something that changed the game. You need to see what she's planning next. And there's only one place to do that. The HOA meeting. I knew what she meant before she even finished the sentence. The next Crestview community meeting was scheduled for that afternoon, held in their pristine clubhouse with its faux marble floors and artificial turf lawns. I didn't belong there, and that's exactly why I had to go. When I walked through those doors later that day, heads turned. I wasn't dressed like them boots, still dusty, shirt creased from work. A man who clearly didn't fit into their tidy world of HOA politics and curated appearances. Patricia was already at the front of the room, standing behind the podium like a politician in full campaign mode. "Friends," she began, her voice warm and fake as honey. "Our beautiful community is under attack." I stood in the back, silent, as she pulled up a slideshow of aerial photos pictures of the lake. My lake framed with red circles and bold fonts warning about unregulated access and unsanctioned activity. She spoke about invasive species, about erosion, about the threat of wildfires from illegal fires on community land. "This is not just about one man," she said. "It's about protecting our children, our property values, our peace." The room nodded, murmured, some clapped. I could feel the mood turning. But before she could roll into her next lie, a voice broke the rhythm from the far side of the room. "Then why were you at the lake last week, after everyone left?" The room turned. A woman, by the window mid-40s, sharp-eyed, spoke again. "I saw HOA folks sneaking around there, midday, carrying something, looked like chemicals." That cracked the mask. Patricia paused just a beat too long. The room went quiet. I stepped forward then, slow and steady, like a man who had nothing to hide and everything to show. "If we're talking about threats to the community," I said, pulling a manila envelope from my coat, "maybe we should take a look at some facts." I handed the photos to a man in the front row. Each one passed from hand to hand, Patricia pouring liquid into the lake, her assistant standing nearby, containers at their feet, timestamps, coordinates. Still frames from the footage no one could ignore. "This is your HOA president," I said calmly. "On land that isn't hers, polluting a lake that doesn't belong to Crestview, and lying to all of you while she does it." The murmurs grew louder. Some stood. Some demanded to know the truth. Patricia tried to talk over them, voice rising, hands trembling just slightly as she clutched the podium. But it was too late. The room wasn't buying it anymore. I didn't wait for a verdict. I turned and walked out, but not before I made sure she saw me drop another copy of the photos on the refreshment table right next to the cucumber sandwiches and HOA flyers. The message was clear. Her little kingdom was cracking, and I was just getting started. That night, I stayed at the ranch. I didn't sleep. I watched. I had replaced all my old cameras, some real, some fake, but the good ones were hidden, tucked into fence posts and birdhouses, streaming everything to my laptop. I knew Patricia, knew her pride. She'd never let that meeting be the last word. She'd want revenge, proof she was still in control. And sure enough, just before noon the next day, a maintenance truck with Crestview's logo rolled up to the gate. I watched through the lens as 3 men stepped out. They didn't knock, didn't announce themselves. They walked straight down to the water's edge and began installing no trespassing signs on my land. But they weren't done. One of them pulled out a mallet and started staking more signs along the tree line, deep into my property. Then came the barrels. They rolled them down the incline like they were stocking a warehouse. From a distance, I could see the glint of warning labels. They weren't just bluffing anymore. They were trying to poison the lake again, make it look like I had. I watched, jaw clenched, as Patricia appeared a few minutes later, wearing sunglasses and a new designer coat. She pointed, directed them, smiled. That smile of hers, like she was winning a game only she knew the rules to. I let the footage run. I saved every second. And I knew what I had to do. This wasn't just an HOA feud anymore, this was criminal. And in the morning, the world was going to know. The next day, I uploaded everything. The footage of the poisoning, the signs, the trespassing. I added context deed records, old maps, Evelyn's court documents. And I titled it simply, "Oh President, Caught Poisoning Private Lake in Broad Daylight." I didn't expect much at first. Maybe a few dozen views, maybe a couple of angry emails. But within hours it was everywhere. Thousands of shares, comments flooding in, local reporters calling, people from all over the country chiming in with stories of HOA, abuse, and land disputes. I wasn't just some guy defending his lake anymore. I'd become the face of a battle people had been quietly losing for years. By the end of the day, the county had launched an official investigation. The Environmental Protection Agency called to schedule testing. And Patricia? She went quiet. Completely. No press conference. No response. Just silence. Until the next morning when a thick manila envelope showed up on my porch. No return address. Inside, a typed letter and one simple sentence at the bottom handwritten in blue ink. Leave the lake, or you'll lose more than land. I held that letter in my hand, the morning light catching the curve of the handwriting, and I didn't flinch. Because now, Patricia had just made her final fatal mistake. She'd crossed the line from manipulator to criminal, and I wasn't going anywhere. Not now. Not ever.